Welcome to the Marconi Project, an oral history series of the Italian American Museum of Washington, D.C. In these interviews, we capture the memories and experiences of Italian immigrants and Italian Americans in the nation's capital. We are ready to hear your story.
Hello, Lena. This is June 26, 2022, and I'm about to do an interview with you for the Marconi Project. Let's start with, what is your name?
My name's Carmela Lupica, but most people call me Lena because my family used to call me Carmelina, and Lena meant the little one since my mother was Carmela, so I get to be called Lena, but my name, professionally I use Carmela.
So where were you born?
I was born in Totorici, in the province of Messina, but lived most of my life between Totorici and Maniagi. Maniagi is a town in the valley, while Totorici is in the mountains. And my parents were farmers, so they actually worked for Lord Nelson's family. He was given a huge plot of land, almost 62,000 acres of land in Sicily, in 1799 by King Ferdinand III, and so we worked his land basically. And during the summers, we would go back to where my grandparents lived in Totorici.
Okay. What memories do you have of your early years in Sicily?
To be honest, I don't have a whole lot of memories because I left Sicily when I was 6 years old. And so I do remember leaving without kissing my grandmother, which became a huge issue in my family. I do remember having, there was a little river that went between Totorici and the outskirts of Totorici where we lived during the summer. And I remember we used to cross that stream to get to the city and back and forth. I remember my grandmother's house, which was actually quite lovely for those days, a lot better than what we lived in Maniagi. But that's primarily most of what I remember of my really early days in Sicily.
Do you know any courtship stories about your parents, your grandparents, or other relatives? Like, how did your parents meet?
Well, Totorici is very small. It's
so
a tiny
town.
The grandparents were. Both grandparents were from Totorici. And there really wasn't a whole lot of work there. That's why when the family actually lived most of the year in Maniagi, working the farms. Totorici, both Totorici and Maniagi have very small populations. There weren't a whole lot of potential partners there. And just to give you an example, my father had 4 sisters. 3 sisters married 3 brothers. My father's family, there was my father and his brother, they married 2 sisters. So, I mean, that's how small the communities were. So it wasn't a whole lot of potential there to marry. And they stay married the rest of their lives at the same time for life.
Yeah. So what did your parents tell you about their World War II years?
Oh, Sicily for them was extremely difficult life. When my father went, my father was in World War II. He fought in Ethiopia. My mother literally didn't see him for over 5 years. She was responsible for keeping up the farm. And she was like 25 years old at that time, and she had a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old to deal with. And her sister really didn't help a whole lot on the farm. So my mother was responsible for taking care of all and it was a pretty large farm. So she had to take care of that, and her sister did a lot of the babysitting. But her sister was ill a lot, so my mother had to juggle an awful lot, and she just worked incredibly hard. My father, evidently, when Italy changed sides in World War II, was captured by the Germans and put in a prisoner of war camp.
So where was this?
This was in the Ethiopia area, as far as I know. I mean, my father hardly ever talked about the war. I mean, it was for him a horrible experience, especially after he was caught and put into the prisoner of war camp. I mean, they went hungry an awful lot. From what I've known, he at one time was caught going through the garbage looking for potato skins and egg whites just to survive, and was caught by 2 German soldiers, and one almost killed him. The other one had some compassion and said, "Just leave him alone, he's hungry." But that's what my father remembers of the war, and so he hardly ever talked about it. My parents actually rarely talked about Italy and Sicily, just because life was so difficult for them, so hard, and so, I mean, that's one of the reasons they left Sicily, because of the hardships there.
So you say your father was captured by the Germans. What happened with your mother during those war years?
Well, my mother has some interesting stories. I mean, she and her sister had to take care of the farm while my father was gone, and not only my father, but my father's brother also, who 2 sisters married 2 brothers, and so there were times when the Germans were nearby that the people in Maniaci would go to caves that were along the river and would basically hide in the caves when the Germans were nearby. At one point during the summer period, my mother and her sister took the 2 children and went up into the mountains to Tortorici, and they took the mule and in the dead of night went up to the mountains home. And from the story that my aunt tells me is that they basically were almost caught in the process. Then because they heard Germans speaking and figured it was soldiers, so they had to make sure that the children were quiet. Again, 3 and 1 year old was a little difficult.
Not easy.
And so they skirted the encampment and got to the home. Another time, my mother told the story of German soldiers came through the Tortorici and went into the area where my parents and grandparents lived, and she hid the mule inside the house and cleaned up all around so that there was no smell. And when the soldiers came through, they were looking for food and they were looking for animals. And by hiding the animals, she was able to cajole them that no sane Italian woman would have an animal in a house.
Wow.
And so they didn't look. And she was quite attractive, by the way. So, she could not flirt, but cajole them. And basically got away with having a mule by the end of the war, and which actually helped us financially afterwards, because we were one of the few families in Maniaji that had an animal to work the fields.
Oh, such an incredible story.
Yeah, my mother was quite strong. She's an incredible woman.
Yeah, there must have been quite a feat raising those children during the war for 5 years, not seeing her husband.
Right, and basically working all day in the fields, and then coming home and having to.
I wonder if she even knew he'd been captured.
She didn't. She hadn't. She didn't hear from him for the whole length of time he was gone.
So this all took place before you were born, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so had those German soldiers not had some compassion, we would not be here today.
You would not be talking to me right now.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, my sister even tells me a story. At the age of 1, I fell down my grandmother's stairs and almost died. In fact, when I woke up from the event, I think I must have been like 1 year old, and she basically told me that I woke up in convulsions and seizures, and my mother didn't know what to do with me. She took me down to the Totarichi to find a doctor. There weren't many doctors either, to find a doctor, and the doctor basically told her he couldn't do anything for me and take me home and make me comfortable because I was going to die. So the ladies in our little community up in the mountain would give her different possibilities of what to do with me, and some used garlic on me. Others, this one lady said, there's an herb in the mountain that you can make out of tea. And give her tea for constantly. It was really hydrating me more than anything else. My sister, who was only 10 years old, and my cousin Lena, who lived in the community, went up into the mountains and found this herb. Brought it back, and they fed it to me, or they made tea out of it and gave it to me regularly for a little while, and I came back. I revived.
Maybe those old home remedies work.
Yes. Yes.
So your father never talked about the war?
Not really. I mean, I asked him about it primarily when we went through pictures. I found some pictures of him in his soldier suit and asked him about it. But he didn't really want to talk much about it. But I do know, because he was so hungry. They were starving. The soldiers in the prisoner of war camp. I do know that was a real issue for him. So when I really, really wanted something from both of them, I went on hunger strikes and usually got what I needed. I mean, it was that difficult for them.
Didn't want to see you go without eating.
Yeah, usually it was only for a few days.
Do you think the hardships of the war are what led them to try to seek a better life?
It was more the hardships of the farm life. Again, we lived on what was Lord Nelson's property. In fact, the Castello Nelson, which used to be an old Byzantine monastery, was his home. He never lived there. But his descendants lived there, and one of the dukes, I think like 5th generation down, owned the property at the time. We lived, honestly, it was terrible. We lived like serfs because when Ferdinand gave them the property, the land was given to him, and we were feudal. with the feudal property. And we worked the land, and we gave most of the food to the Duke, and were allowed to keep a little bit of it to feed ourselves.
So basically, your family, it wasn't a financial success. It was just to stay alive,
Right.
have enough food.
Right.
You know, that's incredible.
And it's when I look at what my grandmother lived in, because she had a really nice home in Totorici, versus what we lived in Maniage. 7 people lived in one room in Maniage. But I tell you, the view, when I went back to Italy the first time, the view of where we lived was so gorgeous. It was the most astounding thing, because you had a whole area of wheat growing, and then the river behind it, and then at alpine trees, because they kind of surrounded the Castello Nelson, and then beyond that was the Mount Etna. It was just the most gorgeous view, and I said, why in the world did my parents leave this? Because after the war, much later after the war, and from what I've read in 1982, the land was given to anybody who lived there. So we would have owned a large tract of land had we stayed. But you're talking about 30 years later, when the Duke decided to sell the property off. But I went back and I saw what my relatives were living in, and I said, why did my parents ever leave there?
What did you think about when you saw the house you once?
Oh God! I mean, if you see some of the pictures of what farmers lived in those days, I mean, it was like one room. It was half the size of this room, with 7 people living in it. It was just, now it's being used as a storeroom by the owners in that area. They put their tractors and other equipment into it, and we had. It was astonishing. I was very, very surprised that we lived that way.
Sometimes in your mind's eyes, as a child, you see things.
You see things differently.
Much differently.
Yeah, you see things quite differently.
So, when did you first come to the United States from Sicily, and what do you remember what you brought with you?
My father came here to the United States, and I guess it was 1954. He was sponsored by 2 of his sisters. And here's an interesting story, too. My grandparents, on his side, lived in the United States between 1903 and 1915. And they lived in the Cleveland area. From what I understand, the grandfather helped redevelop the cemetery, which is just incredibly beautiful cemetery in the Cleveland area. And his mother used to have a little boarding house where she boarded Italians who worked in the area. And so he and 3 of his sisters were born in the United States. When World War I hit, his father went back to Italy to fight in World War I, and he was 2 years old at the time, and he never came back until they left in 1915. He came back in 1954. Wow. And so his 2 sisters were, 2 of his sisters were American citizens because they were born in the United States, so they were able to come back to the United States without any problem.
I think they call it 40 quota.
Yeah, and then they sponsored him because he lost his citizenship to the United States because he fought in the war for Italy. Yeah. So they had to sponsor him to come back. He came and he lived with one of his sisters and started working in a steel mill in Cleveland. Made enough money in that year that he was able to buy half a home with his sister and bring the rest of the family to the United States.
Including you.
Including me, and which was great. And in fact, the first time I ever went back to Italy, people there still remembered my mother leaving with 5 children. It was amazing to me that they could remember, almost 30 years later, that, here she left Totorici, again, very small town, that she left and with 5 children. They thought, again, in those days, women didn't do a whole lot and didn't travel all that much. So the idea that here's this woman that's leaving with 5 children to a whole nother country was a pretty amazing story. But again, another reason why I admired my mother so much.
So they went to Cleveland.
They went to Cleveland.
Did they come through Ellis Island? Was that part of that group?
They did. The grandparents did, primarily. And that's why I know that my grandfather was here between that certain period of time, because I found him on the Ellis Island record. Great.
So what do you remember? Do you remember coming over?
I remember being seasick coming over. My whole family was seasick coming over. The only person that wasn't was my 4-year-old brother. I was 6 when we came. My 4-year-old brother wasn't fazed by the travel, but the rest of the family was seasick. He would literally go out and scrounge food and bring it back to the cabin. This is a 4-year-old.
Oh, because
we were all sick.
Now, where did you leave from? Do you remember?
From Messina, and I don't remember the ship or anything like that. But and my cousin, my father's sister lived in the United States, so my father and my cousin came to pick us up at the port and brought us back to Cleveland.
And now, I'm assuming nobody in your family spoke English at that point?
No.
Your family, your immediate family?
We all spoke Sicilian.
So how did that go?
It was pretty easy. I mean, I was only 6 years old, so, children learn English rather quickly when you're very young. My parents, the only thing they ever learned was what they learned off of television. They always spoke Sicilian in the house, and we spoke Sicilian to them, but outside the home we always spoke English. And we were educated. The 3 youngest were educated in the United States. The 2 oldest were put to work in a factory and in a steel mill to help the family financially.
Yeah.
Even my mother worked in a sewing factory. So we had 4 adults working and the 3 children going to school. So we lucked out. Yeah. My sister always says, you had advantages I never had.
Yeah, sure. So what was your experience in school?
I loved school. I was always pretty good in school. And elementary school was great. I became a citizen in 5th grade. I remember my 5th grade teacher, Mrs. Civiletto. She's one of 2 teachers I remember in my life, literally. And I never missed a day of school except for the day I became a citizen or the morning I became a citizen. My father had to become a citizen after 5 years in the country, and the 3 smallest children were able to become citizens with him as a result. And so we all went to I don't know if it was City Hall or, exactly where we were, because I was only 10 years old, so I was just glad, I was going somewhere. And it was nice. It was nice to become a citizen. And then I went to school in the afternoon, and the teacher, tell the rest of the class, here's, Lena, who's become an American citizen. I got to tell them about the experience, and that was really neat.
So apparently you thrived in school, because I see you have, 5 master's degrees?
A few, yes.
Do you want to tell us anything about that? This all took place in Cleveland and elsewhere?
Cleveland and elsewhere. I got my first master's actually in Houston, Texas, at Clear Lake City, near the Johnson Space Center. I went to school there after 5 years of teaching in Cleveland. I went on for my master's in the study of the future, which entailed strategic planning and forecasting capabilities. And from there, the last term of that course, I came to Washington, D.C. as an intern to the Congressional Clearinghouse on the Future. It was a relatively new organization, committee within Congress. It was actually an ad hoc committee. So I interned there for the summer, and I was supposed to go back to my teaching job in Cleveland, and they offered me a job at the Clearinghouse in the Future, and I kept it. So I stayed here in Washington and worked there, and had a wonderful experience, because Congress actually worked in those days. In the 70s and 80s, Congress was actually quite functional. So I worked there for 3 years, and then it wasn't until much later, and after 9/11, that I got 2 more graduate degrees in information systems management and information technology. With those 3 degrees and my futures degree, I was able to get a full-time job with the University of Maryland, teaching overseas as a traveling professor. That was an incredible experience, being overseas, being in South Korea, Japan, Italy. Went back to Italy for a whole year. Lived a couple of months in China, doing some teaching and traveling there. Then 9/11 occurred with the huge earthquake in Japan where I was teaching, and because of that experience, I decided after almost 10 years to come back to the United States. I came back to Washington, D.C., where I had a home, and there wasn't a whole lot in terms of jobs for me, so I went to school and got my last master's degree, which was in cybersecurity. My degrees.
So tell us how did you end up at Sigonella Naval Base?
Sigonella was one of the jobs I had with the University of Maryland Global Campus. It was while I was working full-time as a professor for the university. I had been in Japan for 3 years, and almost 3 years, and my mother died while I was there. And I told the vice president that that one of the wishes of my mother was always that why was I teaching in Japan and not in Italy? Because the university had programs all in many countries, and Italy was one of them. And so, I told the story to my vice president, and it just so happened that he had started the program at Sigonella. He was in the intelligence division during World War II, and had started the program there. And he says, I can make that happen. So they sent me there for a year. And
what was that like?
Oh, God, it was one of the most wonderful experiences of my life. I got, not only the teaching was fun, but but I got
What did
to.
you teach?
I taught business courses and information technology, information systems management courses, and I also got to teach a graduate course in business at the time because they couldn't find a teacher in Sicily to teach this particular course, and the teacher had left quite. Not frequently, but all of a sudden left, and they couldn't find a teacher right away. So because I had the business background, they let me teach the course, which was fun to teach at that level, because students are just more serious about their education at that level. So I taught there, but the greatest experience actually was getting to meet my relatives. I got to meet at least almost 300 relatives that I didn't even know I had. I mean, the first time I ever went back, I basically met a couple of my father's sister, and my mother's side of the family. But to meet more of the children and even my father's side of the family, it was just astounding how many people
you
I had there.
At this time when you visited your family members, you were living on the base, the Signal Naval Base?
I lived on the base for a couple of months. I then went and lived with my cousin in Bronte, which is about 5 miles from Maniage. I lived with them for several months, maybe 5 or 6 months, and then I moved into a little apartment in Catania near the Opera House.
Oh.
And that was really neat. I mean, I had such a variety of experiences. Also got to know, because I had to take a bus from Catania to the base, got to know how irresponsible some of the bus drivers were. I mean, one day they just stopped, and he had to go get himself, a smoke. He had have his cigarette. He just stopped, went out, got his smoke, and came back. Went out. You would never see that in the United States. I mean, they have to keep on their schedule. Italy. Whatever. The trains run when the people want it to run. The buses run when the people want it to run. It was something else.
So do you have any experiences about when you went back, or did your family member relatives, were they expecting you? What did they know about you? What did you know about them?
Well, they knew of me because of my first trip there. My second trip was maybe 20 years later. But my family in Italy are just so gracious, so loving. They couldn't do enough for you, literally. They would oftentimes fight over where you would be and what they could do for you. I mean, I lived with my cousin for 5 or 6 months. They loaned me their car to get to Sigonella. Which was great. I mean, they literally can't do anything for me that I didn't even have to ask.
Now, how did you communicate with them?
I spoke it Sicilian, the very broken language. I mean, I am bright, but when it comes to languages, I lose the skill. If I don't use it, I have other languages. I used to know some Japanese, some Korean, some French. French I still know quite a bit, but and Russian and Chinese. But I've forgotten most of them because I don't use them. And Italian, I mean, I only spoke in my family and with my close relatives in Cleveland. So when I left to go to Houston for my first degree, I never returned to Cleveland. literally. So from the age of almost 25 onward, I rarely spoke the language, other than either when I traveled to Italy and when I was in Sicily for the year in Sigonella. I never had a reason to speak the language. So I've lost quite a bit of the Italian. In fact, it's not even really Italian. It's Sicilian dialect, which is quite different from the Italian language. I mean, Italian language is incredibly beautiful. There's a melodic tempo to it that I absolutely love. I love listening to it. What's one of the reasons I come to the church is just to listen to the language spoken as it's supposed to be spoken. But Sicilian dialect is quite unique and different. In fact, I have a story which was kind of interesting. The first time I ever came here, again, I was like 24, 25 years old, and I went to Taormina, and I wasn't sure I wasn't sure whether I should go visit all my relatives in Tortorici. That's the only person I knew of was in Tortorici, and I wasn't sure about going there, so I went to Taormina first, and I laid on the beach, and I at the bottom of Taormina, I stayed in a hotel in Taormina, and I happened to be in a little shop in Taormina looking at some linen because I thought it would be nice to buy my mother a nice tablecloth. And I'm asking the guy, the owner there, about the linen, and I have this feeling that somebody's staring at me behind me, and it got to so irritating to me to have this feeling. I turned around and said, "What are you staring at?" And the man was so surprised, and he said, "Signorina, you are so young, but you talk like an old lady."
It was the dialect of your
Because
parents.
there was the dialect of my parents. So when you think of more than 20 years, almost 20 years passing, and that's all I knew, that the language changes.
Yes.
And so evolves. So by that time, they were using more of the Italian. More of the children were educated. Where in my parents' generation, my father had a 3rd grade education, my mother a 5th grade education, and not beyond that. And so most children just worked on the farm. That's why they had so many children. I mean, most of the members of my family on both sides had 5 to 7 children at any time. Now they don't have children at all, which is a real problem for Italy. But in those days, we spoke Sicilian, but as the children got educated, they learned the Italian language. And so in that 20-year period, it, as you said, it evolved. And so I was kind of unique to this person.
Yeah. I think to go back a little bit, I think before you went to Sicily, didn't you have your own company for a while?
Yes, in Washington, D.C. I had come back. One of the things after I left, I came to Washington as an intern. 3 years later, I was given a job, offered a job by AT&T to do strategic planning and forecasting and trend analysis for them. So I went to New Jersey for 3 years. And then Senator Al Gore contacted me and asked me to come back as the director of the Congressional Clearinghouse in the future. So I came back to Washington and directed the Clearinghouse in the future for 3 years. And after that, we had a new chairman of the committee. He wanted his own leadership, his own director. So I left and started my own business called Early Signals. And I ran Early Signals for 17 years until 9/11 hit, and a lot of the business just vanished because I was required to travel quite a bit, and there was very little money for traveling in companies in those days, and that's why I then went to teach full-time for the University of Maryland and went to teach overseas. But I ran my company called Early Signals for 17 years and worked for quite a few different Fortune 500 companies. I did a little bit of nonprofit work and a little bit of government work, doing primarily strategic planning and forecasting.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So this was all before you went back for your year in Sicily.
Yes. Yes, because the year in Sicily occurred when I went to teach full-time for the University of Maryland Global Campus. And I went back to Sicily in 2004.
How had the situation in your hometown or two hometowns changed in those intervening years since you first went back?
Well, as I said, after in 1982, the Duke sold the property, and also the government took all that property and gave it to the existing residents. So their life became quite nice, and Sicily has a tendency to have little enclaves of communities, and my relatives, all their children lived in one enclave. Another enclave in Bronte lived together, and the ones in Maniagi were doing quite well. They were still farming, although they weren't growing wheat and fave and lentils anymore. They now had apple trees and pear trees, huge tracts of land and vineyards that and they needed the children to work those farms. So their life, each of them improved the homes that they lived in. And the ones in Bronte did also quite well. I had one cousin who I lived with who owned her own seamstress shop. She made wedding dresses for people in Sicily, and so they lived in this little enclave too, and just they were very, very involved in the church there. Which was very nice, especially when the festivals occurred. The festivals for Pasqua, for Easter, were incredible. They actually dressed up as Roman soldiers and Christ, and went through the streets of Bronte at Easter time. They had their special foods. It was just quite interesting. I saw more of the culture when I lived in Bronte with my cousins, because there were several festivals in the town there, and there was also a funeral, which is actually quite interesting to see in Sicily. There are the special carriages. I had carote. I had, because I worked at Sigonella, I had a friend who was kind of the liaison between the Italian military and U.S. military. He lived. He had a home by the ocean, by the sea, and I got to go on his boat and see there was a festival where they have the Madonna on a boat and all decorated, going through from one town to another. I mean, it's just stuff like that you don't see much of here in the United States. It's just such a religious country that everything related to religion was very special and unique.
What do you know about your family name? Lupica.
Lupica, Lupa, the wolf. I don't know beyond what the meaning of it is the wolf, but when I was named Carmela, and Carmelina being the small Carmela, was the little wolf in the garden of fruitful delight. That's what my name means.
Well, that sounds great.
But from the name, from my last name, other than that it means the wolf, I don't know anything else beyond it. And I guess it can go back to the wolves who basically, I think, were part of the starting of Rome.
Yeah, the Romulus and Remus.
Right.
So did your parents talk much about Sicily after they came here, or that was just all behind them?
My father was quite intelligent, and he taught himself how to read and write Italian, and he bought himself this little typewriter, and he would type out letters to Italy, and he'd always include a few dollars in the letters and sent them back to his sisters and to my mother's family. And so over the years, the children, literally, when I went back to Italy the first time, they showed me the dollars that my father had sent them. Because they couldn't do anything with the dollars, they just saved them. They showed me the dollars. I mean, it was interesting. I think, he sent a lot more. Sometimes he sent more, like $50 or $100, and that they exchanged. But the little ones they just gave to the children as souvenirs. So that's one of the aspects of he would talk about what was happening back in Italy. In terms of the family, because every now and then we would get a letter from them. But the relationship between Italy and my family in the United States, I mean, they never went back. My mother went back many, many years ago. After I went there, it reignited the relationship between the families. And not only did I go, but then my sister went over. My sister took my mother with her. So it reignited the relationship. A few years ago, about 10 years ago, one of my cousins came to the United States. In 2016, another one came. In 2017, 4 of them came. So there's now, again, they were better off at this point, so they're able to travel at this point. So the families are visiting each other, which is really nice. But before that, I mean, until I went back to Italy when I was 25, they hadn't seen each other. My father communicated with the relatives back in Italy, and sometimes you didn't really know because he put money in the envelopes, sometimes the envelopes would disappear. Yeah. And so they never, so some of the letters never actually got to my relatives, from what I understand. But it was my visit there that reignited the close relationship between the two countries. And since the internet, actually, and easy communication, we talk to each other more often. My sister communicates with them almost every week. My sister was 15 when she came to this country, so she speaks Italian much, much better than I do. And so she's able to communicate with them and write in English. Write in Italian. And I can read quite a bit of Italian, but I don't understand it all because I was never educated in Italy.
So what is your relationship with Holy Rosary Church and the Casa Italia community? What has it meant to you? Spiritual level or relationships? Or how did you start coming here, first of all?
Well, I started coming because I heard that there was actually, I started coming because of the Italian school, language school. I took a language class. And that's where I met you. And so we've been friends for over 20 years.
Yeah.
So I started coming here because of the language school. And then obviously I learned that there was an Italian service, so I started coming to that and gained a great appreciation for it. It was also helpful in learning the language and learning Italian as it's supposed to be learned. And so that's what started me here. And I've stayed here primarily because of the community. The people were just wonderful. I'd love to know more people, but you end up creating little cliques, and so you end up going to talk to them, and then all of a sudden the day is gone, and and you don't have a chance to see others, and everybody has a little bit of their own cliques, and so you kind of, when you introduce yourself, they're gracious, as Italians always are.
Well,
and
sometimes
so it's nice.
because they have a common place they came from in Italy, for example.
Yes,
that
like
binds
the
them.
Abruzzo Molise Society.
Well, the people from Roseto, the people from Vicentro, all the various cities, because they feel they have something in common.
Right.
Yeah. So
Right.
I guess that's natural, but I notice that you, Lena, sometimes go out of your way to introduce yourself to new people.
I go, yes, because the community is what's important to me. Getting to know people is what's important to me. The Holy Rosary Church, the spiritual part of it obviously is an internal, personal importance to me. But over and above that, it's the community that's more important to me. I'm the only one in my family that goes to church. My parents used to only go to church at Easter time and at Christmas time. Those were important.
Here or there?
In
or
Cleveland. In
both? I mean,
Cleveland.
in
Sicily, they were more religious. Here, when they came to the United States, except in Little Italy, the other areas, really all the churches spoke English. There's actually in Little Italy there's a church called Holy Rosary, and there's obviously a lot of Italians that live in that area. And my sister and her husband used to have a restaurant there, so they got to know a lot of people there. But they also, because of the restaurants there, they got both Italians as customers, but a lot of Americans would go there to kind of get the experience of Italy. But they just worked so much that church was, except for the holidays, was not as critical. They're religious, but not religious in that sense. Okay, religion in my family is more of a personal thing. That's why I say coming here, it's more the community that brings me here versus the actual church. although I am involved in the church. I mean, I belong to the Women's Sodality group, and we help raise money for the church. I'm involved with the Abruzzo Molise Cultural Society. I'd like to be involved in doing tours for the museum, Italian Museum. I'm going to be involved in the immigration program that Maria is setting up. So I'm trying to be more involved in things that are important.
You've also helped with the bake sales. You helped with the Bella Italia Market,
yes,
for example.
Yeah. Wherever I can help, I do, if I'm asked to help. The thing is, most people ask me to help with their information technology needs.
I know you've helped a couple of our founders. Their computer issues.
Yeah, I help them. I help people with their computer issues. I help them with. I did the brochure for the Abruzzo Molise Society. I mean, I do what I can.
I remember you were going to help with some event for the language school, but then COVID struck.
Yeah. I'd like to actually be more involved with the language school. And I know I probably should be taking some additional classes to reinforce my Italian rather than my Sicilian.
Yeah. So is there anything else that we haven't covered that you would like to mention?
Well, for me, I guess my work has always been kind of critical to my life. I know I've had the privilege of working in the private sector with my own business, in government as the director of the Congressional Clearinghouse in the future, and in education as a teacher. I mean, I've been a teacher since 1971. In one form or another, whether it's in high school as a high school teacher or as a professor for the University of Maryland Global Campus. I'm still teaching for the University of Maryland
I remember
Global
a couple
Campus.
weeks ago we needed your help in your IT, wearing your IT hat. And you said, well, if I finish grading 300 papers, I'll help you.
Yeah.
By the end of the week, I think.
Yeah, the grading is quite heavy. But I enjoy my classes. The last one I just taught was really a real pleasure because it was the capstone course for the Information Systems Management program, and they had to write a business plan for a particular company. And basically identify the information system that was needed to resolve the problems for that company. And so it's nice to be able to marry my business background and my IT background. And this course did it both. With the small class, I only had 12 students, which I usually have 25 to 30, and just work with the group of students that are about to graduate. I'm very serious about getting all their work done and have to cajole some of the students to do their work, which is oftentimes the case for the beginner students and somewhere in the middle. But yeah, that class was a real joy.
Well, I'm glad you found time during your summer break to do the interview with us today. It's been very interesting and rewarding.
Thank you, Nancy.